The relative direction of 2 points, which I introduced at the end of the last video, is a very special parameter when it comes to describing the shape of an object. Because the shape of a triangle can be uniquely described by specifying the slopes of its 3 sides, and since every polygon can be cut up into triangles, and every shape can be approximated by polygons, one can by and large transmit shapes by transmitting directional relations. In fact, you will notice that this is what surveyors do when they plot out a piece of land by repeated triangulation. Incidentally, the slopes by themselves do not specify the size, only the shape, but our vision is in fact insensitive to the retinal size of objects. Here when I talk about transmitting a shape, what I have in mind is that the axons from the primary visual cortex, V1, to the next area, V2, must transport all pieces of information needed to recreate the shape. Any information they cannot transmit would be stuck in V1. It would, for instance, never be able to reach our consciousness. First, let me say that transmitting a triangle requires more than just dividing the corners into pairs like this and transmitting each pair. The reason is that, for instance, the simultaneous ignitions involving the upper left corner only say something like point displaced from other point roughly in a 112-degree direction. The other one might say point displaced from other point in a 170-degree direction. They don't transmit the important detail that the 2 other points are one and the same point. To transmit this extra information, it is necessary to include a new kind of spatial relation in addition to the directional relation. This one is the same location relation. Like other relations, it must be transmitted via time-correlated firing, and since firing by itself is phaseless, it must make use of its own dedicated neuron type with its own cell adhesion molecule. I call these neurons kernel cells. They have short intracortical axons so that they can only reach cells with cell bodies close to their own, and their coignition protocol is so designed that they only coignite with cells their axons can reach. So whenever a group of kernel cells coignites with 2 directional cell groups in sequence or together, it can be concluded that those directional groups have cell bodies close together in V1, in the V1 cortex, and accordingly their receptive fields strongly overlap. The result is that each node of the picture, in other words, each corner of the triangle, at each corner, 3 specifically marked neuron groups with axonal arbridges looking something like this must coordinate their ignitions. And the kernel group, which is shown here in red, sometimes ignites together with one directional group like this and sometimes with the other. And the fact that both coignitions involve the same kernel group is transmitted by the fact that the same cells participate in each of the coignitions. With what we now have, we can now transmit a whole triangle. Here it is. As you see, this is a fairly busy drawing because it involves 9 neuron pools, 6 directional groups and 3 kernel groups, but the idea is simple. The directional groups must coignite by conjugate pairs, and the kernel groups must coignite with all directional groups in their respective corners. I divided the groups of tracks into 2 columns to make them fit better, and duplicated the top and bottom set in each column to show the continuity. In practice, all these coignitions do not need to occur in succession. It is more desirable for them to keep repeating on a random schedule. like this. The repeated coignitions going on all at the same time are the brain's version of parallel processing. Now, this is only a triangle, but the same idea can be used to transmit more complex shapes. All it requires is that they be cut up into triangles. For instance, let us imagine that we want to transmit something like this. The shape can be approximated by a polygon and cut up into triangles, adding some redundancy. For instance, like this. Then all directions shown as broken lines can be separately transmitted by a coignition. The one difference is that this time there are usually more than two directional lines meeting at one point. But this is not a problem. Simply each directional group at a corner must be tied to the kernel of the corner. For instance, in the case of point 3, which is a meeting point of 5 lines, coignitions must be arranged between 5 directional ignitions with the same set of kernel cells, like this. One other issue is that the visible contours in polygons have to be distinguished from the diagonals which only transmit relative direction. And this requires yet another neuron type and a fair amount of discussion, but I will not bother about this here. I spelled it all out in my book. Here I only wanted to draw a rough sketch and make it plausible to you that neuronal firing can actually transmit shape.